Y'all good?
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. Happy album release day to you, Jesse and JC, and
Thank
to
you, Sweet
myself.
King.
It's very exciting to have this thing out. Itchy Soul, the record drops today, and this is what we're doing instead of an album release show. Obviously, we can't do the show, so we're going to sit here together and talk about the record, talk about some of our favorite tracks, talk about some of the interesting things that went into it. So we hope you guys find that interesting. If you haven't already heard the album, you can do it on Spotify, hear the whole thing on Spotify, or buy it on iTunes, whatever you want. But if you want to hear the album before this conversation, this talk will get archived on our Facebook page, so you could come back and hear it later if you want, or do the talk and then the album, whatever you want. So yeah, hi Jesse and JC, how are you guys doing?
Hey there.
Good. All things considered.
You guys feeling excited to have the album out today?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I mean, it's been such a long time coming. You know, we worked long and hard on it, and I'm proud of us. And, you know, as with any album, start to finish takes forever. But because we did this one ourselves, obviously, it seems like it took a little longer. And of course, now that we're in quarantine, or whatever you want to call it, time has no meaning anymore. So I feel like we started this album before I was even born.
Definitely. And I think one reason maybe that it took a little longer, besides the process itself, is just we had more ears on it, I think, than previous albums. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I thought you bring up the process. I thought it might be cool to kind of start this conversation out by talking about the things that were different about this process of making this record compared to our previous ones, because this is our fifth album, which is kind of funny because through the entire process I kept referring to it as our fourth album. All of my files on my computer are all labeled GRB fourth album, and then 9 months into making it I was like, wait a second, this is our fifth album. So anyways, our fifth album, and we definitely went about it some really different ways. So I thought maybe that would be a cool place to start talking about. We recorded it primarily at home, which is totally different than anything we've done before. We
in the room that you're sitting
in this very room, which, as you can see, is not a studio, and that was really different. We went into Echo Mountain studio in Asheville with Julian Dreyer to record the drums, and then everything else we came in this room, laid down bass, guitars, keyboards, synthesizers, percussion, vocals, harmony vocals, all kinds of things just right here. You guys want to comment on what that experience was like for you, compared to working in a studio as we've done on every other record?
Yeah, it was incredible for me. I had such a great time doing it, and it not only was it, I thought, slightly more fun, just being more relaxed and doing it at our own pace, on our own terms or whatever, but just it was just a little bit less pressure and a little bit more natural, organic, I guess you may call it, which is kind of humorous because it's our most quote unquote produced album, I would say. So to have it feeling like the recording process was slightly more organic than our previous recordings is kind of cool for me, in the sense that, it's very heavily produced, but because it was such a natural and comfortable environment as we made it, I think that the end product really captures those two worlds pretty well.
I think for me, despite not playing with you guys live in the studio, I felt very comfortable in the fact of just knowing the song forms beforehand and going in there and as opposed to being three musicians in the studio all playing to a click, just me and Silas, where Silas is just playing like a scratch track, and I'm more focused on the metronome. So I feel like it just allowed for me to kind of lay down a more solid rhythmic foundation that could then be layered on top of. And with regard to the drum sound, I knew that I wanted to experiment and try something different. I had used my own acrylic kit in the studio for I think for every album that I've recorded with you guys, and this time around I opted to try something different. And yeah, I just in the interest of exploring new territory.
Yeah, it paid off. I think it's interesting to think about how drums are, in my opinion, and I think it's a widely shared opinion. Like, it's so much harder to record drums than every other instrument, and the quality of the drum recording is so essential to whether or not a record sounds good or not. Like, I feel like almost always it's the drum sound that is the difference between something sounding really professional or really not, or very like pop and canned, or more rock and roll or whatever. Like, the drums color so much of the overall sound, which is, I don't know, maybe something that people who haven't done much recording don't realize,
Yeah.
True.
And JC on the drums, like, it's funny, like in the studio, if we're all recording like live together, for me, there's a lot of pressure, and playing along with JC, having already laid the drums down, was almost more like playing live, in the sense that I feel like most musicians make a lot of eye contact while they play. It's a pretty common thing, but with JC, it's pretty rare that we actually like make eyes while we're playing. Like, JC's usually, you're really intense when you play, and we do occasionally make eye contact, but it was kind of cool, like, playing along to your drum tracks, because it was like, while we're playing live, yeah, we have a live feel, but at the same time, we're not making eye contact. Whereas, like, if we're in like the big studio Echo Mountain or whatever, recording together, and like we make eye contact during that, like, I'm definitely going to make a mistake. Like, I'm never getting through that take successfully, because there's all that pressure or whatever. So again, kind of just such a relaxed feeling, and yet very comforting to have everything just like laid down already. Don't have to worry about it, and just kind of can hear it and feel it and play along with it.
Yeah. So
I do think with go ahead. I was just going to say, with regard to eye contact, if I remember correctly, I think when we first started playing together, there was a lot more eye contact, at least on my behalf, and I feel like just the level of comfort that happens when musicians play together for years, as we have. I don't know. I think your ears become. It's more about what I'm hearing than it is what I'm seeing, if that makes any sense.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I don't want the fans to think that we don't actually ever make eye contact. We do look at each other. And so I feel like Silas and I, we constantly look at each other. Like,
but it's also, it's like
too much.
It's like JC's saying, like, there becomes like, you can cue something visually. You can give someone a, like, hey, this thing is coming. But when you've been playing together for so long, you can do that musically by the way you're phrasing something, or the way the drum fill is getting, or the way I'm wrapping up a solo. Like, you guys know my playing so well that when that's coming. So for anyone who's watching who doesn't know this major difference that we're talking about, on all the previous records that we've made, we've all been in the same room together, playing at playing live, and then traditionally vocals are recorded separately, and then other things are overdubbed, like sometimes other guitar parts or keys, or we've brought in horns or whatever. But the main core tracks of drum, bass, and guitar we've recorded live, standing in one room together. And on this record, another thing that we did really differently was we didn't do that. We recorded everything one at a time and just stacked one thing on top of each other. So JC did everything, all the drums for the entire record first, and then I think probably Jesse did pretty much everything second, and then I put guitars down, and then we started stacking all the other usual stuff that you kind of sprinkle on top, which was a really different experience. And I was pretty hesitant about doing it that way, because I don't know, I just didn't. It's hard. It feels like you lose something in terms of that chemistry. But I agree with what you said, Jesse, that like it didn't feel that way. Once we were into it, it felt very comfortable. It still felt like I was playing with JC, even though and you, Jesse, even though you guys weren't actually in the room with me at the time, it really kind of made almost no difference. It just allowed me to focus more on myself and getting my parts right instead of focusing on, how are we doing as a whole? Because by the time I recorded guitar, the drums and bass were already, basically perfect. And by the times I recorded vocals, everything was in place.
Yeah, I feel like, when JC went into the studio, he was so ready that he just went in and like nailed it. And we just recently watched The Batman with Bane, and I feel like when he gets out when he gets out of the pit, he does it without the rope. And so I feel like when JC, he had the one shot, and he did it without the rope, and so he made it. It was perfect, and then we just never had to worry about it after that. Yeah. Whereas sometimes you get into the studio and maybe the drum track's perfect, and like, oh, I need to overdub the bass, or I need to overdub this guitar, and then the drum, you're like, oh, I don't know if that's really lining up with the drums, and then you start all the second guessing, like, we need to fix, we need to redo that snare, we need to redo that beat or whatever. So just having everything just like taken care of, like, was just another like weight off, in my opinion, that kind of goes with making it feel a little bit more natural, and in my opinion, successful.
JC, do you have specific like studio drummer influences? Like, I know who some of your general influences are as drummers, but I do feel like part of the interesting thing with this process of recording separately was that, like I was just saying, when I recorded my parts, I was able to just focus on my part, but along the same lines, when you were recording drums or you were recording bass, I could, for the first time really ever, I could fully focus on what you guys were doing, as opposed to focusing on what you're doing along with trying to play and sing and whatever,
right.
Stomp pedals. So anyways, I just thought, like, as a studio drummer, which of course I spend much more time with you as a live drummer, I just was really like appreciating how solid you were and how energetic it was. It didn't feel like you were just in there by yourself. Like, you were really pounding it out and bringing all the energy. I just wondered if there were certain drummers that you kind of lean on for guidance in that direction, or does it come to you?
I would probably cite this one specific John Theodore, who was the drummer for the Mars Volta, who I've brought up many times,
and now the drummer for Queens of the Stone Age.
He did a cover for Modern Drummer. This was back in, I think, maybe 2005, and he tracked a whole Mars Volta album where it was just him laying down the drums to a click. He knew the forms so well. I don't even know if he had a scratch track, but he might have had a scratch track. But he expressed how that enabled him to lock in with the click, and that was, he knew the forms, and his focus was the click. And obviously, there was some tempo change and stuff that he had to play around, but that always kind of stuck with me as, the album's called Francis the Mute, but that album, there's a lot of improvisation in it, and it always stuck with me of it is possible to do something like that if you know the songs well enough.
Yeah. And the players well enough.
And the players. And, and obviously they played together for several years before that. So I think that also has something to do with it. But it always struck me as something that I thought would be cool to try.
And we do have improvisational sections on this record. Like, we do have jams where you were literally in the studio jamming to no one. But I think part of that it's a comfort level because you have some sense of what we do already, because we've played thousands of shows together. But I also think it's a trust level where, like, that we're gonna come back through and make you look good, and we know that we're gonna be building on something that's gonna make us look good. Like, there's a trust factor where you can still jam to each other even though you're not in the same room. It's
one thing that's really cool, actually, about like more improvisational sections specifically, and being in the studio and not having those things there, is that it kind of flips the roles where, like, if Jesse's going to solo, you're going to solo. you're kind of soloing to me rather than us playing together, and I'm kind of like listening and trying to support you.
Totally.
It's kind of making you shape your solo around what I did. And, you know, and that's cool.
And part of the thing too with why we wanted to record separately is because it gives you so much more flexibility in editing. And so, you know, we're able to really try new techniques that we've never done before. Like, for example, Can't Stand, which is the last track on the record. That was a song where JC laid down a loop, and then so he played the beat, I don't know what, 8 measures or 16 measures, and then we looped it for the entire length of the song. So it literally is just that one piece that he played repeated over and over again, and then he listened to that and did fills, drum fills, and like cymbal swells and things like that on top of it, and then we were kind of edited it to be whatever we wanted it to be, which was a really unique experience that we've never gone about things like that before.
Yeah, it's kind of funny about like one of the things I was thinking about was like how solid JC's drumming is on this album, obviously, but also for, you know, Can't Stand and a couple of the other songs with the loops, like for me, like you're talking about like what drummers influence you like for the studio, but like this is like one of the times in my life where I've done like the least amount of just like woodshedding prior to the studio, because once again, lower pressure because we're doing it at home, but also like I knew we were doing a lot of loops and stuff. So like getting the stamina up or whatever to play like Can't Stand is very repetitive bass line. And ordinarily getting ready for a studio session, I would just, you know, weeks prior, just like run it every single day over and over and over again, as long as I could, and try to keep that stamina up or whatever. But because I only knew I had to do like 8 bars or 16 bars, it was kind of it was another level of pressure taken off. Kind of like, you know, I need to have my part ready, but I don't need to have like this incredible stamina, like running through the 3 or 4 minute song and then being like, okay, let's do another take, and then running through it again, trying to get it perfect every single time. It was just it was just really nice knowing that because we were doing some loops, that it was only going to have to be like, you know, 8 or 16 bars of like nailing it, and then we could just loop it. So it was
for certain songs, yeah.
For certain songs, yeah. Obviously, not every song is like that. There's only a couple that do that, but
it was cool too, because even on the songs where we did do loops, one thing that I think was really important to all of us is that, you know, it didn't sound too looped. And so there are things where like on Can't Stand is a great example where both on the bass and the guitar part, that the overall general groove is looped, but it seamlessly is moving in and out of parts that aren't looped, where the bass is doing a little different lick, or you actually on that song come in with a second bass line, which is obviously super odd, but I love.
I think too, like the loops, it kind of like in similar to what do you call it, like pitch correction, or like what is it called, like an auto-tune. Like if you use those things to serve a purpose and an artistic idea, like I think with Can't Stand, it's a very, we're trying to create like a hypnotic vibe, and the loops enable that to happen. And similar to auto-tune, like those things can be used artistically. But I think for me personally, with this album, like the loops in particular, the drum loops, that was like kind of a bridge that I had to cross in terms of, in my mind, like, you know, things that I think are cool to do and things that I, you know, holding on to these ideas about, tradition and this is the way things are done. And
other things feel like selling out or cheesy or cheating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like that was a big step for us on this album, was basically saying, screw all that. You know what I mean? Like, let's just do it, like you said, like whatever serves the song the best, whatever is going to make the coolest production. We live in an age where, you know, I go from listening to Run the Jewels to Billie Eilish to Led Zeppelin to Broken Bells to Pavement to the Black Keys in one day. And, you know, those are all records that are made incredibly differently. And some are auto-tuned out the wazoo, and some are, you know, super raw and recorded in one day. And it's just kind of, I think it was hard in some ways for all of us to break that sense of like, here's what we have to do as a rock band. But I feel like it was really liberating to break that and get into some, something fresh.
Yeah, because when you're listening to a finished product, most of the time you're not the one that has been working on it, so you're only hearing the finished product, and so you don't know what the process was, and so it's easy when you're going into something to be like a purist or whatever, a traditionalist. But if everything that you listen to, that all your favorite records were done not that way, like, it is important to like be able to evolve and like change your mind on certain things. And like we've all talked about many times on this album, like this was a great learning experience for that, letting some of that go and just trying things differently and doing things in a way that gets you the best finished product, not necessarily getting you the best process that maybe doesn't lead to the best product or whatnot.
Yeah, and you were saying recently in an interview we did for something, I don't remember what it was, Jesse, you were saying how much like this record was a change for you in terms of bass tone and effects and stuff. I thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, it's funny because and one of the ways I think about it is like with vocals, with any instrument, vocals in particular. When you have a song like in your head, you have like one vocal in your head or whatever, like the lead vocal or whatever, and then you listen back to it and you're like, oh my god, there's like a chorus of people singing, or there's like several layers of vocals, but when you're listening back in your own mind later on, you're only playing that one vocal. Right. And so for like as a bass player, I have that same, I feel like we all do this with the instruments that we like to hear. Like I've got that bass line in my head and it's got a certain tone that's just bass, but then you listen to the record and you're like, oh, there's like tons of effect on this bass. And so like that's kind of like breaking out of that traditional or purist form or whatever to get new sounds and new tones. Now, if you listen to the Get Right Band, the Itchy Soul album, and then you listen to like the Black Keys or whatever, you're gonna probably hear some similarities. But I'm never gonna listen to the Black Keys and be like, oh, there's that bass is too distorted or whatever. It sounds great because the song sounds great, and it's the sum of its parts that makes it great. And so this album really has helped me just finally get over that hurdle and do whatever it takes to make the best finished product.
Yeah, and
it doesn't matter what the process was.
That's why I think reference tracks are so useful. Like I've heard some people say in the recording process they don't want to be listening to, say, a Black Keys song to see how they did this or that. But I feel like it's so useful because it's so, like you were saying, you analyze your own music so intensely in a way that you don't analyze other people's music. And, so often it's useful for me to hear someone else and go, well, okay, I like it when Jim James drenches his voice in the most insane amount of reverb. So like, why can't I do that? Even though like I might think it sounds ridiculous, or like the opposite, like, oh, I love this song by Failure where the vocals are completely dry and it's like he's like right there whispering in your ear. Whereas if I hear that of my own music, I'm like, oh, I hate this. I can't stand to hear myself this way. But you can just learn like, well, no, I know it works, and that's a valuable place to learn. And I feel like we have such a strong identity as a band that I'm never worried about coming out sounding too much like some other band, because I just don't think we're in danger of that.
We're safe.
Yeah. I feel like we found, after however many years of playing together, I don't know. This is the first album that we put out where I feel like our voice is unique enough, and it's its own thing. Not to say that it wasn't before, but I don't know. It's a personal opinion.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing that was different about making this record, and part of all this stuff that we're talking about, like finding this voice and finding these new ways to do things and a new process, is that we also encountered some moments of like friction and tension between each other, which is, I think pretty uncommon for us. And I don't know that really happened on any previous records. And I thought it was cool. Like we had to kind of hash stuff out a couple of times. It's not like we're getting in yelling fights or anything like that, but just disagreements over, this all album related stuff. This thing should happen or that thing should happen, and then people, mostly me, taking it too personally. And like I thought it was cool that when we hashed some of that stuff out, the sort of conclusion we came to was not this person needs to behave differently and this person needs to do that differently. It was more like, yeah, if we're pushing ourselves in a new territory, there's going to be some friction. Like it's hard, and we're passionate about it and we care about it. And really the conclusion is that some friction isn't the end of the world. And like shortly after we had that conversation, I know we were all in the van on tour somewhere listening to an interview with Edward Norton, and he talked about that exact thing where the interviewer was saying, like, you have a reputation as being difficult and challenging to work with. And Edward Norton was like, yeah, I'm challenging. I challenge other people to be better. I challenge myself to be better. I want them to challenge me. The idea that we as artists don't like to be challenged is ridiculous. Like nothing, I forget he had so many great quotes about it, but just saying like nothing that's really new or fresh is ever going to be not hard to get to. And I don't know. I was happy that we could have those, disagreements, but understand that, there's a respect and everything, and it just has to, get hashed out when you're passionate about the music.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the first album that we've done where I haven't gotten like actually depressed. Like the last like 2 albums or maybe 3, I've like, been depressed like throughout the making of the album, and like, been like sad and like crying and like having like emotional low points. Whereas this is the first album for a lot of the reasons that we're talking about right now, like where I never experienced that in the least. So I was in a much better place emotionally, and perhaps that was working at home, and perhaps that was us challenging each other and dealing with those things in a healthier way.
Yeah, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and name them all, but there are many times where I feel like, I really felt like A should happen, and one of you guys really felt like B should happen, and either we came together on C, and that was like way cooler than A or B, or we went with, my way, or we went with your way, and it just like, I don't know, I just feel like it worked out, and it's exciting, especially when that kind of collaboration leads to something new, that option C is an exciting place, because sometimes, like, oh, I would not have gotten there. Like, this is cooler than what I wanted to do, and I could not have gotten there on my own.
And I mean, in some ways, not to get too vague, but what you were talking about, in terms of there needs to be not friction, but there needs to be, there's growing pains, but almost like, if you have 2 people and they're one has option A and one has option B, and they arrive at option C together, like it's kind of indicative of like you were saying, a mutual respect and an ability to work together, and rather than, not to say that we don't sometimes fold for each other in different ways, but like when a new idea comes up as a result of 2 different ideas, I think that's a really good place to be.
Totally.
Yeah, like to cite a specific song, if I may, Can't Stand, which is the last song on the album, was, we used to do it as a 6/8, and JC had the idea of playing it in 4/4, and up until like the very end of production, I like basically just didn't even like the song.
I knew you were gonna come around.
I was so resistant. I was just like, I don't see it. I don't like it. And then, finally I came around. Thankfully, Silas and JC, you guys were really helpful in bringing me around. But now when you listen to it, it's like, oh my God, this is like, I don't want to say a masterpiece, but because that's a little conceited, but it's a great song. It's a great finisher on the album, and the production's great, the song is great, and it would never have been that way if it had remained the way that it was.
Yeah, that's another thing about like trust and just knowing each other well, because like I knew you were gonna come around on that, and there are other things that you didn't like that I didn't know that. You know what I mean? Like there are other things where you were like, I'm not feeling this, and I was like, well then let's change it. Like but like I knew you were gonna come around with that, and I think like all three of us, we discussed it at the pretty early in the process. Like let's all really take our time with new ideas. And so like we did much more than ever, and part of it is because we recorded at home, of just sending each other ideas or doing the work together, emailing it to ourselves, and then all taking a couple weeks to like sit on it. Because so often you hear something and it's like, nah, I'm not feeling this, and then you hear it 10 more times and you're like, oh, okay, I really like this.
The 4/4 idea, it came about, I think when we were playing with Love Ray, I was playing to that song just in my own personal practice, and I just started playing a 4/4 groove against the 6/8, and then I kind of heard how your vocal was sitting on top of that, and then it occurred to me that a 4/4 groove, you might not have to change your vocal that much to make it flow over that, and that's kind of when I brought it to the table and we started working on this album.
Yeah.
Does the final version sound anything like you had maybe thought it would have, JC? Or is it like totally, is it evolved even further?
It's evolved even further.
That song evolved a lot. It's almost unrecognizable. Other than the vocals, it's completely unrecognizable from the original.
It's definitely one of my favorite songs on the album, and I don't know. It's just, well, there's several things that I like about it. One thing I really like about it is the way that the guitar, instead of the guitar, like there's parts, but the guitar creates a lot of atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that's mostly what it does. And I really like that about it. And it's really kind of more centered on the groove and the bass line and the vocal.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a cool one because it was easy to mix because of that arrangement. Like, I feel like, sometimes you're mixing stuff and you're like, oh, I want a little more guitar, and then you turn that up and you're like, well, okay, now I want a little more bass, and then, okay, well, now I want a little more drums. Well, now we're going to need more of the vocals, and then you've just turned everything up, which is the same as, doing nothing. Whereas on a song like that, I feel like everything really had its own space. The bass is up high almost the entire time, which gives all that room on the low end to the kick drum. And then the guitar is so not prominent that it doesn't, the part is not prominent. It doesn't need to be mixed prominent. So it really just left a lot of room for everything to kind of be in its own space, which was cool. You want to talk about some other favorite songs?
Please.
It's hard. Jesse always says, it's like picking a favorite kid. It is hard to pick favorite songs, but
I think for all the parents out there, you can have a favorite kid.
Just don't tell people.
I've got 2 cats, and I have Penny is my favorite. I'm sorry, let's say, but it's okay to have a favorite kid.
Yeah, I have a few favorites on this record, but one of the ones that I think is interesting to talk about is the lead-off track, which is "Wired," which is the first single we put out, and with a music video as well. And besides really just being happy with how this song turned out, I really liked in the process of making it that I felt like this was kind of like a cornerstone to kind of building the structure of how we were going to approach producing this album, if that makes any sense. We keep talking about pushing ourselves into new territory, and part of that is that we didn't know what that territory was. It wasn't like we said, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and that's how this album is going to sound. It was more like we had these songs, we recorded the songs, or started recording it, and then we started really saying, how do we want to build this up? How do we want to serve the song? How do we want to make this both more modern and more psychedelic and more pop and all these different things. And Wired for me was maybe the first song that started to kind of unlock the secret, where there was a bigger use of like synthesizer than we've ever done in the past, by far, and just dialing in those drum sounds and bass sounds, and I don't know, it just kind of helped me once we sort of got 75% of the way of producing that song. I started to have an understanding of how to deal with the whole rest of the record, which was kind of just an exciting moment.
Yeah, I think that the theme for me, kind of in thinking about these songs, and I think part of the reason why that's the first track on the album, or maybe I've just, maybe that's just the way I feel, but it really is about bridging the gap between the power trio live and then the final studio product. And so with Wired, it's such a sparse song, and we play it live and we rage it out. But then you can do so much in the studio with it. So like you were saying, with like the synthesizers and whatnot, that riff, that sweet riff that runs throughout this song is like, we can play that live with the bass and the guitar and it sounds cool. But then, when you're like running a bunch of synths along that line and then like a bunch of other guitars layered there, it's like you take the core power trio and you make it like this much bigger and greater thing. Whilst still maintaining the core trio,
right? Like we don't have any trouble playing that song live, even though the studio version has like 10 more layers or more than what we do live.
Yeah, and I think kind of like what JC was saying, like we have a sound, we found like our identity, and that runs through this album pretty well. But we've just taken it to the next level with the production. And
I feel like with that song in particular, it sets the stage for the rest of the album in such a way that it's telling the listener that we've departed from the rock trio. There's synths and there's layered vocals and there's electronic percussion. Yeah. And one thing that I'm really happy that we did with this album that we hadn't done before is Jesse and I, we did vocals on some gang vocals, and I think we did some harmony stuff, but Silas did the majority of the vocal stuff and the harmonies. And I just think Jesse and Mai's vocal style is different than Silas's, and I think in terms of creating cohesion between the voices, like Jesse and I singing those harmonies live can work in that setting. But I think for the album, I don't know. I think it worked well to have Silas singing a lot of those harmonies, and on this song in particular.
Yeah, it was cool too, because I feel like we chose carefully and wisely when those moments would be, and then like there's that part in No Sound where all the vocals are just the two of you guys, and then I come in with that kind of finishing line or whatever. And yeah, it was cool to make more of, that was kind of part of what we've been talking about, of just breaking any sense of this is how it should be done, or this is, just because we do it live, this is the way we should do it, but really picking like what's going to sound best. And yeah, that came out well. And then we also had some kids and teenagers sing with us on that song, which was really cool. I was desperately trying to get my Pink Floyd Another Brick in the Wall moment. I often think like all I should be doing is trying to rip off the Pink Floyd. Like that's, if I could just make an album that's just 100% dedicated to ripping off Pink Floyd, which is not what we did, of course, but it's always a good source to draw from. So we had some kids come and sing that bridge with us and stack a bunch of harmonies. And one of those kids was my niece, Kiana. She's a teenager, not a kid. And she is the star of the music video that we did for that song. So if you haven't seen that music video, check it out. It's on our it's on our pages. But it was just so cool to work with her in that capacity because she has acting and dancing experience, but you know, and I knew she had a lot of talent for singing and acting and dancing, but I'd never worked with her in any kind of professional way before, obviously. So it was just cool to get there and film this thing with her, and just to have her be so like prepared and so confident in front of the camera, and just like I felt like she just did such a great job. And then we filmed all these other kids, and they were just being crazy in a good way and just funny, and like it was just really the music video was a real kind of joy to make as well.
Yeah, it turned out fantastic.
It did. Did obviously Jesse and I weren't there when you were doing it, but how was that process of working with Kiana? Did you kind of have it laid out for her of this is what I want, or did she have ideas for you? Or
I had to scream at her a lot to keep her on track. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, well, you know, so the three of us had kind of talked through the general concept of the video. So she had heard all that. And then when I was up in Maryland where she lives for Christmas, I actually filmed it. So Jesse and JC weren't there for that, but Eleanor Underhill, my girlfriend, was there. So she was helping me film it. And Kiana and Eleanor both brought a lot of ideas to the table. And yeah, it always changes so much from the original game plan. I like to have a really clear game plan because I'm somewhat new to filmmaking and filming and directing. And so I like to be, and it's just my personality, like I like to be very prepared and know that if no one has any inspiration or any ideas on that day, we're going to be okay because we have a plan. But of course, that's never what happens. So yeah, there was a bunch of stuff where, you know, Kiana said, what if I tried, you know, dancing like this? And a lot of the parts where she's being like the most kind of crazy and wild in the video were just things that she wanted to try or Eleanor wanted her to try, which at that point we hadn't even, I don't think, planned on having the other kids in the video. And that was kind of what sparked the idea of just having like a bunch of kids just going nuts, which they did. And the other thing that was really cool is there were times like in between takes where we were fussing with the lights or whatever, and she was just kind of goofing around, and I kept the camera rolling, or Eleanor came over a couple times and got the camera going when Kiana didn't know that she was being filmed. And there's a fair amount of that footage in the video because I love filming people when they don't know they're being filmed because they can be so like not self-conscious. And she was doing this whole thing where she was singing the song in all these different styles, like just to be funny, while she was waiting for us to move lights around. So she was doing like a spoken word version of it and a rap version of it and a folky version of it, and like kind of dancing like accordingly. And like a bunch of that footage is in there, which, you know, she had no idea it was even being filmed. So yeah, it was cool. Jesse, what you got for some favorite songs?
Well, the two songs I kind of picked to focus on today are "Give Me Rain" and "Fire with Rain," the Rain medley, and because those two tracks for me are kind of the, I guess maybe not the most trio-oriented songs, but those are songs that I guess kind of like Wired, like they really translate from the stage to the studio very well. But kind of going along with that theme we were talking about earlier is like making the production such that our trio sound is taken to the next level. "Give Me Rain" and "Fire with Rain" are kind of like just great examples of how we raw trio sound, great songs live, and then in the studio you get that same power, but just, you know, with a little extra, with that extra production. In the case of "Fire with Rain," it's that the looping and some of the cool effects that we've thrown on, and some of the synthetic percussion or whatever that's thrown in there. And so I really love that song because it's so sparse, it's so trio-ish,
yeah, and
yet it's so heavily produced in the sense that it's got the loops, the synthesizers, and then that, I call it the bomb going off in the middle of the song, you know, when the bridge kicks in or whatever. I love that part. So that's obviously that's pretty cool. So I love that. So yeah, I love the way that song turned out, because like I said, it translates really well from the stage to the studio. But when you're maybe hearing it in your head later on, you're not necessarily thinking about all the tricks or whatever that we use in the studio. You're just hearing the song for what it is, which is just a great song. And kind of the same thing with Fire with Rain, or Give Me Rain. That's a song that's just, you know, it's got a roots. It's got the trio roots in there, and it's like it's got some funk in there. And yet when we took it to the studio, like, Silas, you didn't even play guitar on the verse like that. You replaced that with synth, and so it's kind of cool that we just took it to that next level, where you still break it down to the core of the song as the trio, but we did some production choices and made some changes to just to give it that little extra, and maybe, you know, wind up with something that's just, you know, better than it was going in.
Yeah, it's cool. Sometimes I feel like the sparsest, I mean, I'm just thinking about it now as you're talking about it, like with Wired and Fire with Rain especially. Sometimes the sparsest songs are the most fun to produce in the studio, because there's room to do cool stuff without, because, you know, we're all, I think, pretty opposed to that just kind of wash of sound. Like we all like sort of individual clear parts and stuff, and you know, it's nice when there's actually room to bring that. And you brought up the electronic percussion. Fire with Rain is a great example of that. I feel like that's kind of a thing that really colors the sound of this whole album, and part of what makes it more modern and makes it more, you know, just really different from previous records. And like, you know, a lot of that came from you, JC, and I thought it was interesting that you filled in a lot of that space that we would normally fill in with percussion, with either electronic percussion or things that really don't sound at all like percussion, but are sort of filling a similar role or something.
I kind of knew, just from, you know, making some MIDI music at home, but never having the opportunity to record. I don't really have a great setup at home to record live drums. But I knew by virtue of laying down the drums in the studio that way to the click, and trying to really lock him in with that click, that it would make, you know, the layering of MIDI percussion in there later, it would make it work a lot easier without having to, you know, to move drums to make things feel right. And also, I mean, just simply playing to a metronome or playing to music that is recorded to a metronome is helpful too. But I kind of knew that I wanted to mess with bringing some of those sounds in. We also doubled snare tones and added. I think on one song we have like 5 different snare drums going at once.
Yeah, that's true. That was one of those points where I was like, there must be an easier way to get to this sound, but I love the sound that we've gotten to. Like,
yeah,
it was cool. Yeah, some of that stuff was interesting. And the electronic percussion thing too, or just percussion in general, was I thought like a big part of Get So High, which is another one of my favorite songs. And I don't know, I feel like that's maybe the song from the record that I've been the most excited about. And it's certainly partially just because of how it came out. It's very like funky, and it's got kind of like a almost like disco funk beat. But it's one of the few songs we've ever recorded that we had never played live, and it was not even fully written, you know, before. I mean, not only have we not played it live, we literally had not played it together. I had just kind of written a chorus, and that was basically all that existed when we went to record it. So that I just thought it was really cool, kind of like, I think it turned into one of the most collaborative songs that we've ever done. And I knew that I wanted there to be a drastic shift in style in the middle of the song. So it was going to be like, a standard kind of verse, chorus. And then I knew I wanted it to just do a 180 and switch to a totally different style. But I had no idea what that style was, and I had no idea what would happen for that whole rest of the song. And so the way that whole second half of the song came together, which was really challenging and took us a long time, and we took a lot of different stabs at it, going in different directions with it. I just thought that was really cool, and like I think it really started with a like bell, like a cowbell part, or the version that we ended up using kind of was built on that. And then like I thought it was cool too coming up with that bass part, because I had like a kind of loose bass line idea that I had thrown in there just as a filler. And then when Jesse went to lay it down, like we just did a bunch of different takes of you doing a bunch of different things, and then edited it into something that was, I feel like it was one of those examples where like I brought A to the table and you brought B to the table, and JC brought C to the table, and we ended up with D. Like it, I just felt like the thing we ended up with was much cooler than any of the individual ideas.
Yeah, I really like what you did with that production, because you kind of took, like, I liked playing bass to that, but I also was, even like you said, we didn't really know how that song was going to turn out before going into the studio. And for me, I didn't even know how it was going to turn out even after I was done recording it.
You kept saying that you didn't know what to play because it didn't exist. The song didn't exist.
Yeah, and so like I went in there and so I was just like, oh, this is what I've been working on. And I was like, okay, I'll play this. And then I was like, I know there were some gems in there, but it wasn't like cohesive really at all. And I was just like, I guess, some good material. I don't know what Sas is going to do with it. And then when I heard it back, I was like, oh, sweet. Like, that's you did a great job kind of putting that together.
Well, I feel like, likewise. I mean, I feel like you did a great job of like, it makes me think again, actually, about that same Edward Norton interview. He was talking about a director he'd worked with. I wish I could remember who. And he said that the director believed in casting and editing, and the actual process of filming was just like filling up the gas tank of a machine that he was going to completely build around it later. And I felt like that was kind of the approach that we took to this song, and maybe certain other songs too, where, we just like got enough of the right material. Like you played some really funky ideas, and even as you were playing it and saying like, I don't know, that didn't really work, I could already hear like, yeah, like this maybe isn't right, but this is so cool, and this is so cool. And if we can just do that with it, like it's going to be the dopest thing ever. And no one, other than us telling people, no one would ever in a million years know that wasn't like one seamless take. As with all music that people are hearing on the radio, if it's done well, it sounds like one seamless take, but it's not. But I just really like how that came out. And it's definitely one of the most kind of just psychedelic, groovy, bits of music we've ever played.
There's something really cool too about like just being thrown an idea in the moment and being like, here, off the cuff, what's your ideas? What do you want to do with this? Like, you don't have any kind of preconceived idea. And I think too, at least for the drums, we had already laid down, that might've been I think that was one of the last things we laid down. So rhythmically, I already had a sense of what was happening. So it kind of, maybe based on that, I had an idea of, okay, well, here's this new idea that I didn't really have any idea about what it was, but I've done all this, so I can kind of navigate it based on what happened earlier in the session.
Yeah. Yeah, it came out cool. I'm excited for people to hear that one. JC, you got any other favorites you wanted to talk about?
The only other one I wanted to mention is Future Blood. I think it's the 5th track on the album, and I felt particularly drawn to this song because of the lyrics initially, and
nice.
Just just feeling in general like I'm upset on a fairly regular basis at the potential of people to really to just being upset at the potential of humanity if we could get our act together to really thrive, but at the same time like looking around and feeling like people are just taking the earth for granted, and so this song really spoke to me, and it also like kind of brought back that trio vibe, like it's drums, bass, and guitar like hitting you hard, and
It rocks hard.
and then the song after it also kind of has a similar trio rockin' vibe. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of in a way, it's a little break from the more produced kind of feeling that's happening throughout the album. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one song that I think your drumming is just stellar. The performance was spot on, because it's like it's simple or whatever. Like when you're doing, like, I don't know what you want to call it, like the pre-chorus or pre-verse or whatever, where you're rolling on the snare or whatever.
Very long snare roll.
And I think because maybe people that are not musicians don't necessarily know how difficult doing something like that is. That's that fast and that repetitive, and and yet dynamically like increases the whole time. So I really, that's one of my favorite performance pieces on the album, even though it's not like a solo, it's just some solid drumming.
Thank you.
I feel the same way about the drumming and the bass playing on that song, because when it got to my part to lay down the guitar, I felt like that was one of the easiest songs for me to record, because I just, I don't know, what you guys laid down was just so solid, and I just knew exactly how to handle it. That song didn't take as much exploring or trial and error. It kind of just, it really built itself up kind of easily from the drums to the bass to the guitar to the vocals and stuff.
I kind of had like a, not that the song necessarily reminds me of Rage Against the Machine, but I kind of had that energy and that vibe in my head when we were recording it, and then even listening to it after the fact. And just that riff, like kind of the main riff that's happening in the verse. I think one thing for me when I was initially trying to figure out how to make that groove, I mean, it's a 9/8 groove, but I wanted, the song is so driving. I didn't want an odd time signature to make it feel like there was some kind of momentum being lost. And after playing around with it and talking to you guys, I think we found a good place where it sits and still drives really hard.
Yeah, and that's a song that I don't think we've ever played live in front of an audience. So like, it's same with
we tried it like once, like at its earliest, like somewhere on the road, and we were all like, let's save that one.
Some night where no one was at the show, we were like, all right, let's try this. Yeah, there's a handful. That one, It Gets So High, the new version of Can't Stand. There's a number of songs that like we've never played live that would be really cool to bust out. I also thought another cool thing on this record is you guys both play synth on it, which has never happened in the past. Was that exciting? I got
that microKORG I got like 12 years ago. I finally was able to put it to some use.
Yeah.
It's always fun. Like, I'm sure anybody that's played around with those kind of machines knows you put the headphones on and you start playing away, and you don't even have to know what you're doing, and you lose like 5 hours of your life.
It's endless.
So it was cool I kept like texting Silas being like, what setting did you use to get the sound or whatever? It was cool. Kind of going back to what we've been talking about, but yeah, really it broke me out of my shell a little bit, and I was happy to do that. And it's just cool to be like, when I was a kid, I would look at like the liner notes. Not that people do that really anymore, because most people just listen online. But I always thought it was cool when you would see the list of musicians. I mean, they're technically, yes. If anybody gets the physical copy, you can see it. But I was always kind of interested to see like, oh, they're doing more than just playing bass or just playing guitar or whatever. So I was kind of fascinated, especially if you look at a band like Steely Dan, where there's like 12 people and like, people are credited with like guitar solo one.
Right.
So like, I always think it's cool to like see what other people are doing. And it was cool that we all actually got to share that. I feel like in previous records, I think Silas really did most of the like auxiliary stuff like that. So it was kind of nice.
And there wasn't that much of it.
Right, yeah.
Previous records. But I want to, I really like the synth part you played on Fire with Rain. So there's someone who was interviewing us recently was mentioning how that song is kind of like a rhapsody, and it's got like 3 really distinct sections, which is funny because I'd never thought about it that way, but it totally is that. But in that second section where what did you call it, Jesse? The cannon?
I call it the bomb. The bomb going off.
Right after the bomb goes off, that whole section is all synth played by Jesse. And I really like that because it felt like, I don't know, I just really like that line. I like how you played it. And then on Nothing on the FM, JC that's probably my favorite, the organ part on it that you played, I really like. And that was also one of those examples of a thing where when I first heard it, it was just so different. Like that's probably, I think we talked about this, but that might be the song that we've been playing live the longest, Nothing on the FM. And when you get so used to hearing a song a certain way, it can be hard to accept big changes. And when you play that organ idea, like I was like, man, I really don't see how that fits in. And then, it was that kind of thing of like, oh, let's sit on it. And the next time I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then a few times later, I was like, oh my God, I love this organ part so much. And it's definitely one of my favorite parts of the song. It's cool because you make some weird choices that like, it's a good example of like just a thing that I never would have done. There's some chord choices, especially I think right at the end of the song where, one of those things where when you break down the music theory of it, it doesn't actually make any sense, but it sounds awesome, and you can't argue with that. I mean, who cares if it makes sense if it sounds awesome, which is cool. Sometimes it's hard to come to those, find those places.
I think too, like just by virtue of doing it at home or a large majority of this album at home, like it was cool, like just to be able to sit there and open up a file and pull out my MIDI keyboard and just say, I don't know. I sometimes, we'll be in the middle of working on a song and maybe one of us will think a certain section needs something, but you don't know what. But if you're in a studio, you're not going to sit there and, I mean, you might sit there and try to figure out what does it need, but
not if you're on a budget though.
Yeah. So like, at home on the MIDI keyboard, whether or not we actually use the MIDI or we hire somebody to come in and play that part or one of us does it, like it just allowed for, I think, all of us to have opportunity to put ideas into the mix. And, I don't know, is very exciting and it is very engaging.
Yeah. We should also shout out all the people who helped make this record. The 3 of us spent an awful lot of time working on it, but certainly didn't do it alone. So Julian Dreyer over there at Echo Mountain recorded the drums. And then we consulted with him a few times through the process, just kind of bringing the mix into him and doing a round of, for anyone who hasn't been through making an album, mixing tends to kind of happen in rounds, do a first mix, second mix, third mix, whatever, however many it takes. But we did one of those rounds of mixing with Julian, which was really valuable. And then JC's got another band called Random Animals who was, I think at the same time, right, making a record with Ted Marks, and JC had really liked working with him as an engineer. So we took it to him to get another set of ears on it, which we've never done that before. And it was so cool. Like, I remember we all kind of left his place being like, wow, you could just do this forever. You could just take it to like a third engineer and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth and just see like what each person brings to it. But I thought that was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. I think, like you said, you could just keep doing that. But it was, even though maybe it wasn't like night and day before and after the session with Julian and the session with Ted, it was like I just felt really good about their input and the direction of the album after that. It's almost like you feel healthy, but then you go to the doctor and they're like, oh yeah, you're doing great. And then you leave and you're like, oh, sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good to get some encouragement from them. And then I feel like Ted in particular, like some of the stuff that he brought to the table was really subtle on the one hand, but also made really big differences. I mean, sometimes he would make changes, you know, where he'd be like, is that too extreme? And I couldn't tell if he was joking because I was like, it was very not extreme. It was a very subtle change. But obviously he's got, you know, all the engineers all have those super tuned ears where they hear that stuff. And then I would get home and listen and I'd be like, you know, that subtle change like really made this sound a lot stronger.
Definitely. And you put all those subtle changes together and, you know, then it makes a big difference.
Exactly. And Eleanor Underhill also is helped out a number of times on the record with just production ideas, engineering feedback. She's singing on a few tracks. And then we got the three kids that were singing on Wired, Kiana DeRocher, Alistair Cahill, and Ivy Rose. I don't know how to say her last name. Voloshin, maybe. Just some random kid we found on the side of the street. No, just kidding. We know her. She's a friend of a friend. But yeah, all those people really brought awesome things to the table. The artist, visual artist, this guy goes by Seamlesso or Seamless on Instagram. He's from Puerto Rico, I think. We just found this piece of art that he did that we really liked and worked into the design of the record. And then we did this super cool augmented reality thing, which I can't really demonstrate right now, but if you download this app, actually, I mean, I can actually demonstrate it. I'm gonna do it. It's gonna take 1 second. Download this app called Artibeat. It's free, and then you point it at the record. See if this will work. It's too bright. It gets all trippy and does weird shit that you can't really see. There you go.
Oh my god.
Anyways, check it out. It does cool stuff. Anything else you guys want to talk about? Anyone else we need to credit or questions?
Just all the family, friends, loved ones, spouses, all the listeners, all the good humans, everybody.
Yeah. Not
the terrible people. They suck. But they may have helped us along the way. I don't know.
They haven't.
It's obviously it's funny every time I've been listening to radio and they use the word
you turn on the FM radio. Oh yeah.
And well, just when I'm swinging a hammer, and they keep using the word unprecedented times and every time, and now it's like, yes, I know we're living in unprecedented times and we truly are, but you know, just I want to express gratitude to both of you guys just to be able to do what we're doing. And yes, it sucks that we can't have a release show, but I'm just reflecting on the joy of making the album and getting it out in the world. People can hear it, and yeah, just excited about all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we spent so long working on this. We started working on this, I think you started working on the drums in January 2019, so a year and a half ago, and we started, you know, pre-production on it before, probably a couple months before that. We worked on it for so long, and it's really all for this moment. I mean, the process is very fun and challenging and stressful and exciting and all those things, but I think it really comes down to this moment of sharing it. I mean, you really, you know, we don't we don't make it for ourselves. Even, I mean, in some ways we do, I guess, but it's just, you know, the biggest thing that I want to do with a record is share it with people. So it's been so fun being able to put these couple of singles out already and just getting the really positive feedback from some friends and fans about it. But now that everyone can just hear the full thing, that I feel like we've been talking about it forever, and now it's out. And so hopefully you guys will check it out, and we'd love to, you know, hear what people think about us, think about the record. Send us a message or whatever, get in touch somehow and let us know what you're digging. And yeah, let's stay connected through this weird ass time.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. Appreciate y'all tuning in.